I recently watched a video from Where's Dave titled Gen Z, The Worst Time to Be Alive. And this title alone reminded me of something that I've been thinking about for quite a while now. You could make a serious argument that Gen Z has it harder than anyone in human history. Now, I don't know if you'd win that argument, as a lot of horrible things have happened in human history, obviously, but you can certainly make a compelling case for it. Delusional boomers and just older generations and society as a whole have spent so much time and effort blatantly lying to and gaslighting Gen Z into believing that they have it better than ever. How many times have you heard of this bullshit? You spoiled kids, you should be grateful, you have it better than anyone in human history. Yeah, probably more times than you can count. Now, this statement in and of itself is straight up dishonest revisionist history. The delusional boomers who make this statement never actually researched any human history themselves. They sort of just throw it out there as some sort of ignorant blanket statement. But if you spent even a few minutes to do actual historical research, you'll see that ancient Roman slaves, I'm talking slaves here, not even middle-class Roman citizens, ancient Roman slaves, only worked for about 6 hours per day and had over 130 days off per year. The great Roman philosopher and writer Seneca complained about this very issue in his book Letters from a Stoic, for those of you who want to fact check me on this. They were also legally entitled to sufficient food and shelter from their slave masters. Now, compare this to this nightmare difficulty economy Gen Z has to deal with today. Gen Z is expected to work over twice as much as ancient Roman slaves did. 2 to 3 jobs, 2 to 3 side hustles, and as you've all experienced, still don't make enough to pay for rent and food. Basic living expenses that even ancient Roman slaves were entitled to. This alone proves that your modern day working conditions are not just worse, but significantly worse than that of a literal slave in the ancient Roman Empire. Anyways, this isn't meant to be another historical comparison video of mine, though I am currently in the process of making an absolute banger of one of those, which I'll be releasing early next week, by the way. But this video is about why I believe in one specific manner Gen Z has it more difficult than anyone in human history, and that is from a psychological standpoint. You see, when these delusional boomers try to gaslight you by saying stuff like, oh, be grateful, at least you don't have to deal with the Black Plague, at least you don't have to fight in the trenches in World War II, at least you're not living during the Great Depression, there is one key aspect in which they're overlooking with all of this. Of course, if we're only talking strictly about physical and material reality, we can all agree that as bad as the economy is right now, we'd rather be living here today than dying of the Black Plague or fighting in the trenches in World War II. But life can't be simply reduced to the physical and material world. There is a mental and psychological aspect to life as well, and this is where I believe no one has ever had to deal with the BS Gen Z has to put up with today. I made a video a while back comparing the modern day economy Gen Z lives in to the Great Depression. One very interesting I learned was that the main way people survived during the Great Depression was that everyone was going through the same thing, and thus everyone had a lot of empathy for each other's struggles. As a result, they formed strong community bonds to help each other out. And we all know how dead community is today. Everyone knew the economy was screwed back then, so there was no expectation to become rich or hyper successful back then as there is right now. And this leads me to the one aspect in which I believe you can make a serious case that Gen Z is living in the worst time to be alive. Never before in human history has there been a time where so much was expected out of a generation that was given so little. Sure, in the past, from a purely reductive materialist standpoint, we've definitely had more challenging times between all the wars, famines, and plagues we've suffered. But even in the worst of those times, societal expectations of people were mostly aligned with the objective physical reality of those times. A lot of people died horrible deaths with the plague, but they weren't called lazy or soft for not being able to survive. They weren't constantly being flooded by thousands of Instagram pictures and TikTok reels of healthy people being like, hashtag, I survived the plague, what's your excuse? They weren't being told by their asshole boomer parents, hey, There was a plague and famine when I was your age too. I still survived and made it. Why can't you? Hey, so-and-so's kid is the same age as you, and he survived the plague. Why can't you? Why are you being lazy and making excuses on your deathbed? Get up, take some responsibility, and pull yourself up by the bootstraps. And this is the ultimate point here. People back then didn't live great lives by any means, but they weren't expected to either. Only modern day Gen Z and millennials have been handed such a dogshit world and economy, but still be expected to succeed as if it doesn't exist. As if we're living in a parallel universe where it's still 1960, the economy is booming, and rent is still $50 a month. When I was about 12, I was playing outside, and like a silly typical little 12-year-old kid, I decided to stupidly hang off an unstable tree branch where I had jumped off from many times. My grandma saw me doing this, and naturally she scolded me and told me to get down immediately. I told her, hey, there's nothing to worry about, because I had jumped off this branch many times in the past, and I knew I could land safely from that height. She then told me, no, when you prepare in advance to jump and land from that height, you naturally curl your legs and brace for the impact upon landing. If the branch were to suddenly break, you wouldn't be ready for this, and you could get seriously hurt. And then that's when I had an oh shit, she's actually right moment, in my head, and I quickly got down from the tree. The point here is that challenges and difficulties in life are much easier to handle when you're mentally and psychologically prepared for them. And this is why you can make the case that modern day Gen Z life is the absolute worst time to be alive, psychologically speaking. People who went through tough times, historically speaking, did play the game of life on nightmare difficulty. For sure, no doubt about it. But they knew it was on nightmare difficulty. They were only expected to produce the results of someone playing a nightmare difficulty game for the first time, and they were able to mentally and psychologically brace themselves for the challenge of a nightmare difficulty game. Gen Z, on the other hand, loaded up a nightmare difficulty game from the time they were born, but they were lied to, gaslit, and manipulated to believe it was on easy mode this whole time. They were blamed, shamed, and humiliated by delusional older generations and society at large for not being able to be a nightmare difficulty game that they were gaslit into believing was easy mode this whole time. Now let me ask you, what's more cruel? Forcing someone to play a game on nightmare difficulty, but at least acknowledging and admitting it's a nightmare difficulty game, or forcing someone to play a nightmare difficulty game, but secretly hacking the interface on the loading screen to make them believe they selected easy mode, then sitting up there and humiliating them and shaming them the entire time they're struggling while playing for not being able to complete the game on easy mode. All while you secretly made it nightmare mode behind their backs without them even knowing. I personally think it's the latter, even if it wasn't quite as hard, because being able to mentally and psychologically prepare for it makes a huge difference. So what's the solution to all this? Well, the fact that you now at least know modern life is nightmare difficulty makes a huge difference. And don't let any delusional older generations who are still living in 1960 easy mode tell you otherwise. We may not have all the answers right now. We may not know how to get ourselves out of this mess right now. We might figure it out one day, we might not. But if we are to ever get ourselves out of this nightmare difficulty hellscape, it starts with understanding and knowing we are in nightmare difficulty to begin with and preparing ourselves for this challenge mentally and psychologically speaking.